Have you ever felt that quiet tug inside your chest, the one that says, they wouldn't question this if I were younger or if I were someone else? Maybe it happened when you said no to something that drained you, or when you made a decision just for you and suddenly felt the need to explain yourself, justify it, defend it, as though your peace needed permission. If so, you're not alone. Somewhere along the way, maybe after years of raising children, holding marriages together, caring for parents, smoothing things over, we started to believe we owed people explanations for our choices. We got used to defending ourselves, even when no one asked. We tried to prove we weren't selfish, when all we really wanted was to live gently, with more ease. And as we get older, that feeling can become louder, more persistent. Not because we're unsure, but because the world around us has forgotten how much we've already given. You start to feel like you're always justifying something. Why you don't want to go on that trip. Why you said no to babysitting. Why you're not answering your phone today. Why you chose rest instead of another errand. Another favor. Another sacrifice. It's exhausting. But here's what I want to say to you. You don't owe anyone that kind of explanation anymore. You never really did. But especially now, at this stage in your life, your peace is sacred. And protecting it doesn't require a permission slip. Take Sophie, for example. She's 67 and spent most of her adult life as the rock of her family. She was the one everyone called, the one who always hosted the holidays, stayed late after family events to clean, remembered every birthday. And she did it all with love. But after retiring and moving into a smaller home, Sophie started saying no, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Her energy wasn't endless anymore. Her time, she realized, was finally hers. So when her daughter asked her to watch the grandkids every weekend, Sophie hesitated. She loved them, of course, but she'd already committed to a watercolor class every Saturday for the first time in her life. She said, "I can't this weekend? Sweetheart, I have something for myself." And then came the silence, that pause on the phone, that subtle sting in her daughter's voice. Oh, okay. That's when the old reflex kicked in, the one that made her want to fill the space, to explain, to reassure. "It's just this one time," she almost said. "I'll make it up to you." But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence be, because Sophie had finally realized something. She doesn't owe anyone an apology for choosing her joy. Not anymore. And neither do you. You don't owe anyone your constant availability. You don't owe them a reason for needing rest. You don't owe them your weekends, your energy, or your identity. You have done enough. You are enough. And your worth is not measured in how quickly you respond or how often you say yes. That's the quiet freedom that begins to take root when you stop explaining yourself. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming whole again. Emily, a retired librarian in her 70s, told me something that made me stop in my tracks. She said, "For years, I felt guilty when I didn't pick up every phone call. I thought they'd think I was angry or sick. But one day I realized, I don't need to explain why I'm not in the mood to talk. I'm allowed to just be quiet. I'm allowed to protect my own peace." It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary, especially when you've lived your life serving others. Especially when your heart is tender and kind. Especially when you were taught that saying yes makes you lovable. But here's the truth. Love isn't earned through exhaustion, and peace doesn't require performance. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to defend your preferences. You don't need to prove your goodness every time you choose yourself. There's a quiet dignity that comes with age, a steadiness, a knowing. You know what brings you joy? You know what drains you? And you have earned the right to honor both without asking anyone else's permission. Jack, a widower in his late 60s, once told me that after his wife passed, everyone had an opinion about what he should do. You need to date again. Some said, you should join a group. You can't be alone like this. And for a while, he tried, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't want to disappoint anyone. He went on dates, sat in rooms full of strangers, laughed politely, but his heart wasn't in it. And finally, one morning, he sat at his kitchen table, made a cup of coffee, and whispered to himself, "This isn't what I want. That day, he chose to stop explaining why he needed more time. He stopped entertaining conversations that felt like pressure, and he felt a weight lift. A small one, but enough to breathe easier. That's when he started hiking again. Alone, quiet mornings in the woods. No expectations, just space to be. And he told me, it was the first time in years I felt like I belonged to myself again. That's what I hope for you. 2. Not a life full of confrontation or distance, but a life where you don't have to dilute yourself to be accepted. You don't have to perform your pain or explain your peace. You get to just be just as you are. You've lived through enough storms to know what sunshine feels like. You've carried enough others to know the weight of your own needs. And you've earned the right to live the rest of your days with more softness, more slowness, and more self-respect. There's something that happens when you've spent decades caring for everyone else. You start to forget that you're allowed to take up space without asking. You become so used to smoothing things over, fixing what's broken, and keeping the peace, that your own voice begins to whisper instead of speak. And sometimes, even that whisper gets lost. Maybe you were the caregiver in your family, the one who always showed up, stayed late, gave more than you had. Maybe you became the peacemaker, the listener, the bridge between everyone else's emotions. Somewhere along the line, you stopped checking in with your own. You learned to read the room before you read yourself. And now, even though the house may be quieter, even though your calendar is more open, the habit still lingers. That voice inside that says, don't say that. Don't upset them. Don't make it about you. But here's what most people don't talk about. Guilt doesn't come from doing something wrong. Often, it comes from doing something different. Margaret, a 69-year-old retired teacher, once told me that the first time she said no to her sister's request for help organizing a family gathering, she couldn't sleep for 2 nights. I kept thinking she'd be mad at me, she said. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I should have just said yes. I wasn't sick. I just didn't want to go. But I felt like that wasn't enough of a reason. That's what years of being the dependable one will do. It teaches you that your reasons must always be justified, that your peace must come with a footnote, that your rest must be earned. And even then, kept quiet. But the truth is, you don't owe anyone your constant yes. Not your adult children, not your friends, not your siblings, not your neighbors. It's okay to say, I just don't have it in me today, and leave it at that. You don't need a detailed excuse. You don't need to overcompensate. And you certainly don't need to feel guilty for protecting your well-being, because here's something no one teaches us. Boundaries aren't a rejection of love. They're the foundation of it. When you start setting gentle limits, not from anger, but from self-respect, you're not shutting people out. You're letting yourself in. Frank, 72, spent most of his life as a provider. Even after retirement, he felt responsible for everyone's happiness, his grown children's finances, his friends' struggles, even the moods of the people around him. He once said, if someone was upset in the room, I felt like it was my fault, or at least my job to fix it. But after a health scare, Frank had a shift. He realized that giving himself away didn't guarantee closeness. It often just left him depleted. So he began practicing what he called compassionate detachment. He could still care, still be present, but he no longer took on the weight of other people's emotions. He learned to listen without absorbing, to love without losing himself. That's when his relationship started to feel lighter, freer, more genuine, because when you stop explaining yourself, people start hearing what you're actually saying. You're not saying you don't care. You're saying, I matter, too. And there's something incredibly powerful about that, especially in later life, when so many are told, even subtly, that their time is no longer their own. Chloe, a grandmother of 5, used to say yes to everything, babysitting on short notice, helping with school pickups, cooking for events. She was proud to be the go-to person. It made her feel needed. But one day, after forgetting a personal appointment she'd looked forward to for weeks because a last-minute favor pulled her away, she felt something shift inside. I realized I had become a background character in my own life, she said quietly, so she did something brave. She started scheduling her own joy, her own appointments, her own moments, and she began saying no when those things were at risk. "I still help," she told me, "but I don't only help, I also live." For me, that change didn't make her cold. It made her whole, because you don't owe anyone your constant self-sacrifice. You've already given so much. And now, it's not selfish to claim a little more space. It's necessary. What many people don't understand is that the older we get, the more precious our time becomes, not because we're running out, but because we're waking up. Waking up to how often we dismissed our own needs. How often we let guilt steer the wheel. How often we said yes when our hearts whispered, "Please say no." But now, you get to listen. You get to pause before responding. You get to feel the full weight of your no and still trust that you're kind, loving, and worthy. Sophie, the woman we talked about earlier, told me something I won't forget. She said, "For most of my life, I thought love meant being agreeable, but now I see that love isn't about being easy, it's about being real. And being real sometimes means not explaining yourself, not because you're above it, but because you're finally standing in your truth. You don't owe the world an apology for growing into yourself. You don't owe others the softened version of your needs. You don't owe anyone the small, quiet version of you that fits neatly into their expectations. You get to be the full version, the grounded, wise, weathered, powerful you who still laughs, still dreams, still honors her own soul. That version doesn't come with disclaimers. It doesn't come with guilt. It simply arrives. And when it does, the world may need to adjust. But so be it, because you've adjusted for long enough. There's a moment, usually quiet and without ceremony, when you realize, I don't need to keep proving who I am. And that moment changes everything. It's not about becoming harder or colder. It's not about closing your heart. In fact, it's the opposite. When you stop explaining yourself, you make space for the truest version of you to come forward, unapologetically soft, wise, and strong. You begin to move through your days with a calm you didn't have before, not because life suddenly got easier or people started treating you differently, but because you stopped handing them the script to your worth. And that shift, it's felt, not always immediately, not always clearly, but it's there in how you speak, in how you breathe, in how you take up space without apology. Caleb, who turned 73 this year, told me something powerful. I used to keep explaining why I didn't come to every family gathering, why I didn't want to travel anymore, why I didn't stay on the phone for hours. I thought I had to. I thought if I didn't, they'd think I was selfish. But then one day, I realized if they really knew me, they wouldn't need all that explaining. So he stopped. And at first, yes, people were confused, a little distant. But gradually, something happened. His children stopped assuming he'd always be available. They began asking instead of expecting. And more than that, they began listening. Because when you stop over-explaining, you leave room for others to grow. 2, you give them the opportunity to accept you as you are, not just as you've always been. Sometimes, the only reason people keep expecting more than we can give is because we've never shown them what our limits actually look like. But when we do, when we gently say, "This is enough for me," we teach them something they may have never learned before. How to meet us with respect. Grace, a former social worker in her late 60s, said she used to explain every little thing to her adult daughter. I felt like if I didn't justify why I said no, she'd think I didn't care. But all it did was make me feel drained. I was carrying 2 loads my own truth. And her reaction to it, she made a small change. Instead of saying, "I can't because," she started saying simply, "I'm not available." No extra words, no guilt, just truth. And over time, her daughter adjusted. Not immediately, not without bumps, but eventually, Grace's peace taught her daughter how to pause and consider someone else's boundaries. That's the beauty of inner alignment. When you live in tune with your truth, others feel it even when they don't understand it yet. And yes, there will be people who resist the change, who push back, who wonder why you've changed. But here's something important to remember. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to live honestly, fully, gently, and sometimes that means being misunderstood for a while. Jack, whom we met earlier, said something that still echoes in my mind. He said, "Once I stopped explaining myself, I thought I'd feel more isolated. But actually, I felt more free. I realized that the only reason I used to feel so lonely was because I was always showing up as a version of me I didn't really like." That struck me. Because loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about feeling unseen even by yourself. But when you start honoring who you are, something shifts. You begin to enjoy your own company again. You begin to choose yourself not out of spite or rebellion, but out of love. You pick clothes that feel good on your skin, not ones that others expect you to wear. You eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired. Speak when you have something to say and stay silent when silence feels more honest. You return to your hobbies, your walks, your prayers, your books, your garden not to fill the time, but because these things fill you. You stop trying to make everyone comfortable at the cost of your own soul. And slowly, your life becomes yours again. Sophie, who we've spoken about, said this to me not long ago. I've never felt so clear. I don't jump through hoops anymore. If someone doesn't like that, I'm no longer saying yes to everything. That's their discomfort, not mine. There's a strength in that kind of clarity. It's not flashy. It doesn't shout, but it stands tall. And that strength doesn't just serve you, it blesses the people around you. Too, because now, when you say yes, it's real, it's full, it's given with love, not out of fear. And when you say no, it's clean. It doesn't come with resentment or guilt, it just is. You're no longer negotiating your needs in exchange for someone else's approval. And that is freedom. That's what happens when you stop explaining yourself. Your world gets quieter but richer, smaller but fuller, slower but deeper. And maybe that's what this season of life is really for. Not to keep doing more, not to keep proving anything, but to return, to settle into your skin, to look in the mirror and say, I like who I've become. And I don't owe anyone a disclaimer about that. Because you don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe them the version of yourself that says yes to keep the peace. You don't owe them the parts of you that are tired of shrinking. You owe yourself a life that feels good from the inside. And the moment you stop justifying that is the moment you finally begin living it. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Not just for watching, but for allowing yourself to slow down and really hear these words, to sit with your truth, to let yourself be seen, even in silence. That takes courage. It takes tenderness. And I want you to know, from the deepest place of honesty I can offer you are not alone in this. You are not the only one who's tired of explaining, who's grown weary of justifying, defending, softening every edge so that no one gets uncomfortable. You are not the only one who's had to unlearn the idea that your worth is tied to how agreeable you are, or how available, or how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice to keep the peace. There are so many others walking this same path, quietly choosing to reclaim their voice, their peace, their time. And now you're one of them. I wonder, has this message stirred something in you? Has there been a moment recently where you caught yourself over-explaining, then paused and thought, wait, why do I feel like I owe them this? Or maybe it's been a slow unraveling, a long-held tension that's only now starting to release. Whatever your story is, I want to hear it. I want to hold space for it. So if you feel moved to share, please do. Write it in the comments below, just a sentence, or two, or more if you'd like. Has your relationship with your adult children, your friends, or even yourself changed over time? What helped you let go of the need to constantly explain who you are? What brought you back to yourself? And if you're still in the middle of that journey, know that's okay too. We don't need to be finished to be worthy. We don't need to have all the answers to begin. We just need to choose gently, deliberately to stop living by the old rules that never really served us. If this video felt like a soft place to land, if it reminded you of your strength, your clarity, your right to be as you are, I'd love to keep this connection going. You can click subscribe if you feel called to, not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because we need spaces like this, spaces where honesty isn't punished, where aging isn't dismissed, and where your voice still matters deeply. And it does matter, even when they don't listen, even when they don't ask, even when no one's around to validate it. You don't have to earn the right to rest. You don't have to defend your need for space. You don't owe them your weekends. You don't owe them your joy. You don't owe anyone the small, apologetic version of yourself. You've already proven yourself in 1,000 ways they'll never fully understand. You've raised families. You've held hearts together. You've shown up when you were tired. You've loved even when it hurt. You've kept going even when you were unseen. Now this season, this is yours. To live gently, to speak honestly, to rest without guilt, to say yes only when you mean it, and to say no without explaining why. Because peace, real peace, doesn't require an audience. It only requires you to return to yourself. So from me to you, thank you for your strength, for your honesty, for your heart. Let's keep growing together. And the next time that little voice inside you whispers, "You don't have to explain this," listen to it. It's your wisdom speaking, and it's time. It's time to stand in who you are, without apology. You've earned that. You are that, and that is more than enough.